Welcome to the Triage Method podcast with me, Gary, Jerome, McGowan, and my co-host, Mr. Patrick Farrell. Paddy, how are you this week?
As per usual, I am absolutely fantastic, Gary. How's life with you?
Absolutely fantastic.
Brilliant. Right now, so first order of business. So I think this podcast is going to be coming out on Thursday. So
yes,
people should have seen on Sunday, Monday, whenever you actually put it up, that you are getting off social media. You are off Instagram. I've been off Instagram for a fucking couple months now. But you have taken the leap of getting off Instagram, right? Last week, again, this is going to be Thursday, so last week you deleted it and people went a little bit crazy. So you're putting up a post, and you will probably have put up a post by now so that people know what's going on. But let's talk to the good listeners through things, Gary. What's the story?
I had a quarter life crisis.
It's just not a thing.
No, I deleted my Instagram because I'm trying to do this whole thing where you actually like try and train to be a doctor while also trying to run your own business, which funnily enough, to my surprise, actually requires quite a bit of time. So yeah, I'd rather just use my time a bit more effectively and be present in the things that I'm trying to do and not waste my time on Instagram, because even when you're not intending to use spend a lot of time on Instagram, even it can really add up. Like for me, if I go on, like not being like, oh look, I'm so famous, like if I was to like log on in the morning, like you could have like 10 to 15 direct messages, and like generally my intent is to want to help those people who are asking questions. So even if you're just like, oh yeah, we've actually written this article, boom, or here's a quick answer to your question or whatever, before you know it, like you've spent 30-45 minutes on Instagram getting very little in return yourself, when I could have spent that time studying 1 to 2 lectures or doing a client check-in or two or whatever it might be. So like for me, in terms of trying to manage my time, it doesn't make much sense to spend it on Instagram. So that was that really.
You're dead right. And I always think of it like Instagram is basically making money off your time, and you don't get to see a cent of that. Like people give out about, big corporations and, business demand and whatever else, like making money off the workers' back. And it's like, if you're on Instagram, you're willingly giving someone your time and they're making money off that. It's like, do you not see the dichotomy here, But related to that, Gary, how can people now follow your journey? How can people get in touch with you? How can people follow you? Because obviously if they're listening to the podcast, which everyone should be, like how can they interact? Like if someone has questions for you, how can they get in touch with either you, or how can they interact with the Triage services?
Yeah, like I mean, that was one of the things about my personal Instagram, is that it's always blurred the lines between like Triage and me. So like people could just answer or engage with Triage and like message us there, or they could read our articles or whatever, but it always, a lot of the time, if they were looking for me personally, it would come through me. So like now it makes more sense to just be like, oh look, this is actually business stuff. Like if you're talking about health and fitness, etc., message Triage. Like that's what we're there for. That's why there's 2 of us. So like that would be the first thing, would be to like follow Triage on social media. That makes a lot of sense. To if you have a question, we have an open Facebook group that people can join, and we can actually have proper discussion there. Because for me, like having conversations on Instagram is actually quite difficult, because the way I would have engaged with Instagram would typically be, right, I haven't kept it on my phone for like a couple of years, so I would always delete the app. So if I went on and someone messaged me, I'd message back and then I'd delete the app, and I might be back again in, I don't know, 12 hours or something, and then you have these messages again, and you can't engage in conversation that way. Whereas if someone messages into the Facebook group and they send in a question, then we're going to have a conversation. I'm going to have an opinion. You're going to have an opinion. Breed might have an opinion. Other people in the group, competent coaches, are going to have their input. And then you can actually have a valuable discussion. And that's what I and we value, as opposed to just kind of the soundbite nature of apps and platforms like Instagram. So engage with the Facebook group. Triage Method Community is the name of the Facebook group. I know some people aren't on Facebook. I probably wouldn't be if we didn't have like a business need to be there. But even if you just, like, some people in the group actually have just profiles that they've set up exclusively for the group. Some of our clients have done that. Or obviously you could just check out our YouTube channel. Like, that's probably the best way to actually, if you're interested in just following us for the sake of kind of seeing what we're up to and stuff, like, YouTube is definitely the best way of doing that. Because it gives me and Paddy the opportunity to put out more long form content about, you know, what it's like to be a student trying to balance these things. You know, people like that stuff, and how you kind of fit in your training, etc., etc. So YouTube, Triage Method on YouTube is a great call. And of course the Triage Method Instagram. To be honest, that's probably like, while I want you to follow the Triage Method Instagram, I would encourage you way more to go to the other platforms, because like, we value longer form discussion, and Instagram is just not set up for that really, you know. So they would be my tips.
Yeah, Instagram's a bit like clickbaity, you know?
Yeah, it is.
Right. So now that that's out of the way, we have something to discuss in this Q&A episode. So this is a question that we got in a couple of weeks ago, actually, but I thought it was a good concept that we could just discuss on the podcast in, again, the Q&A format. And basically the gist of the question is, how can I help, you know, family members or even friends that you've known for, you know, a long time, since childhood, whatever, engage in healthier habits, you know? Because this is something that, especially if you're a personal trainer, especially if you are a fitness professional, but also if you are, you know, the fit guy or fit girl in your group, you know, you generally want to help the other people around you engage in healthier habits. But oftentimes that can, because you have, you know, the friendship, the familial connection or whatever, it can actually make you the hardest individual to actually help these other individuals. So when I got the question in, I was like, I completely understand why you're asking this question, because like, I've been there, you know. And I'd like to think that in some instances anyway, that I've helped family members and friends successfully. So I somewhat know how to navigate this whole thing. And same with yourself, Gary. So what's the story with this? How do we go about helping friends and family when, you know, you want to help them with their health and fitness?
First things first, like you alluded to, people think that these are going to be the easiest people to help, when in fact they're actually going to be the hardest. As in, if you were to pick the most challenging person you could coach, it's going to be like your friend, a family member, your girlfriend, boyfriend, wife, husband, whatever, like, for multiple reasons. And I think that's counterintuitive for most people, but intuitive to people who have actual coaching experience. You know, for that reason, many coaches will refer their partners or family members to other coaches that they know, rather than actually, you know, coaching them themselves. It generally doesn't work out very well. Okay, so that would be, I guess that's kind of the first thing that I wanted to touch on, was the fact that you mightn't actually know this if you don't have expertise in coaching. So this is what I kind of refer to as like the non-expertise problem that people don't really identify. If you don't have previous coaching experience, it's going to be pretty challenging to coach someone who an actual coach with experience is going to identify as being a very challenging client. So essentially what you're taking on is that a type of coaching client that would be that would be the most challenging, essentially. So intuitively, that doesn't make a whole pile of sense that you would be very skilled at doing that. So I guess that would be the first thing, is to acknowledge that it is going to be a challenge, especially if you don't have any coaching experience, because as a coach, what you begin to develop are different skills that are relevant to behavior change, as it relates to exercise, as it relates to nutrition, sleep, lifestyle habits, etc. And behavior change is the biggest challenge for any coach. And people don't often recognize that. People think that coaching is all about just knowledge. And this is how people will typically approach this problem in the real world, is that they might identify as the fit person in their group. They might have got fit themselves. They might be generally into quote unquote healthy eating, etc. But they're not a coach. And that's a very, very important distinction to make, because if you're not a coach, then you haven't worked through some of the problems with other individuals that you're going to be aware of. So you might say to your mother or father or friend or whatever, you might say, oh, look, this is the way I eat, you know, like why can't you just eat like that? Or like, why don't you come to the gym and work out with me? And it just doesn't tend to work out as well as people might think. Do you think that that's a fair assessment, that these are the most challenging people to actually deal with? What
Yeah,
do you think?
100%. Like the way I always look at it, I'm like, what are you gonna do? Tell your mom how to eat and train and do whatever. It's like, first of all, she's the one that probably again, I'm making some sexist assumptions here. She's probably the one that cooked a load of your meals for the majority of your life. So she's thinking like, I taught you how to eat, you know? And then also you have to remember, it's like, she probably has changed thousands of your nappies, you know? So she's not thinking of you as like, oh, this is, you know, an authority figure. She's thinking like, oh, that's my little boy. Oh, I remember when you were 5. And also on top of that, she probably knows the vast majority of the stupid things you've done in life, you know? So as much as she wants to go, oh yeah, like you're really smart, you know, you're my kid, you know, oh, you're brilliant, whatever. She also, in the back of her head, kind of thinks you're a bit stupid as well, you know? So, and that's the same with other individuals in your family connection, your family unit. And again, obviously your friends as well, that they know all of these things about you. So the fact you just don't have that authority figure persona to them, even if you are a professional in the industry, you know, that authority figure, they're not seeing that. They're seeing you as you, the person they know, you know? So that thing that automatically makes it a little bit easier for professionals in the industry and stuff, you don't have that available to you. And also, like you were alluding to there, or what you were actually saying, if you aren't actually an experienced coach, you now have that extremely hard population to work with, and you don't have the soft skills that you've built up over years to potentially deal with that. And like you said, this is why people refer out. You know, they'll refer family and friends to a coach that they know and trust, you know, because it's like, okay, I can get results with you, but it's going to take me 3, 4, 5 times the effort to get the same results. And I could just send you to someone else and you'll get those results, right? So I think that's, first of all, the first thing that we should tell people who are looking to help friends and family and stuff. You know, it's like, you're probably best off just refer out to someone that you know and trust.
100%.
Like that's the easiest way to solve this, you know? And again, that sounds a bit like of a cop out, basically like, oh, well, it's not my problem, someone else deal with that, you know? But it's extremely hard to do that as an individual coaching a family or friend, you know? And now obviously it's not the case with everyone. Like you might have family or friends that are really interested in the process, want to engage with it, etc., and it can really work. But also it kind of potentially sours the relationship you have, you know? Like for example, especially when you're talking about nutrition, because that's something that people like do every single day, where if you've told someone, you know, say again, your mother, your father, whatever, to eat a certain way, and they're eating all their meals in front of you, and you can clearly see they're not eating the way you told them to, that can kind of lead to this little bit of resentment where you're kind of like, what the fuck are you not doing what I told you to do, right? And then it can also lead them to feel kind of like ashamed around eating around you. And again, it kind of sours the relationship where you've kind of blurred the lines between the professional and the personal, you know? And again, it's just not something that you really want to do long term, to obviously keep your family unit or your friends in a cohesive, you know, manner, you know, where you're actually still friends or you're actually still family, you know. So that's definitely something to take on. But also, and this is something that you might be touching on as well, because I know you've made a load of notes, Gary, because you love making notes. People generally don't charge their friends or family, right? So that means that their friends and family don't have skin in the game, you know? Like basically they just treat it as you just having a chat with them when you're giving them advice, you know? Like it's just a conversation, you know? Oh, you wouldn't charge me for a conversation, you know? But the same is true. Like you'll find this in other industries, like accounting, if you're a lawyer, if you're a fucking mechanic, if you are, you know, a handyman or you're whatever, you know, like you'll find that people will pay for those services. Now, obviously, you know, there can be chats with those people, those individuals. You're like, oh, I have this issue with the law or whatever, and your friend's a lawyer. Like, you're going to text them up, ring them up, or whatever, and ask a few questions. They'll give you a little bit of advice for free. But if you're actually looking for essentially legal counsel, they're going to be like, yeah, come into my office and, you know, pay. You know, but people don't see that same thing in the health and fitness world, where they're kind of like, oh no, I wouldn't charge my mother or my father for personal training and all this stuff. But it's like, it's still your time at the end of the day. And because they have no skin in the game, they've paid no money. They're just like, like, it was just a conversation. I can just ignore that essentially. You know, like I didn't get charged €50 for that hour that you spent fucking taking me through a workout program and talking me through nutrition and stuff. You know, I didn't pay for it. So it was just an hour of chat.
Yeah, like essentially what you do is you uncouple two things that are really important for someone getting involved in health and fitness behaviors. Like normally what you've got is the behaviors that are, let's say, meeting up with a personal trainer, engaging in exercise, etc. That's coupled with the potential pain or loss of you wasting your money. You know, it's one thing because you've invested the money, you've invested time, whatever. And essentially what you do in that case is you just uncouple those. Like you said, it's a skin in the game problem where you no longer have something that you are losing if you don't engage in it. And obviously all behavior change shouldn't just be based on pain, but it is a part of the process, especially early on, that there's something that you've invested to keep you in there long enough so you can actually develop the habits, get positive reinforcement, you see the value in it, and then hopefully that's a feed forward cycle where you're actually in the game then for good down the line. But getting in there at the start is the most difficult part. So if someone goes to a free coaching service, you know, they get free personal training. It's like, there's no reason for me to worry too much if I miss that class. You know, it's like, oh yeah, it's not a big deal. Like I didn't pay for it. You know, whereas if you already paid for it, there's pain or loss involved in missing that and not engaging in it. So it's basically like someone that's just pulling you along and keeping you in it for the start. Like you've got your training wheels, but then you take them off eventually and you keep on going. So that's why that can be important. So the basic message there is, don't be afraid to refer out. I think people often take a bit of a hit in their own ego, like when they have to do that, because it's like, oh, but I identify as the fit person, I should be able to help everyone. Whereas I think it'd be better for you and your family member if you just didn't really get frustrated or hurt by that. And then, like, in terms of trying to then set this up and move things forward, I think there's a very key distinction in terms of like what is useful and what is not useful. Like the way I would describe a useful way of putting this into practice would be like bottom up support, environmental modification, and a culture development within the family or within your house environment. And that's in contrast to something like top down rules. So like if you're just trying to set up rules in the house, like you have to do this, we're all going to do this, we're all going to do this, we're all going to do this, like you know, no more sweets, no more beer in the house, all our meals are going to look like this. Like people aren't going to respond to that because you're just telling them what to do and you're not actually changing the way that they would normally make their decisions. What you can do instead is like, number one is like that bottom up support that I said. What that means is that you're there to support them in their decision making. So for example, if you're in town with your mom and you're deciding like, oh, where might we go for lunch? That you're just thinking, all right, let's maybe pick somewhere that is 1 point better than somewhere that we would normally go. You know, so instead of going to say McDonald's because you love going to McDonald's when you're out with your mom for lunch, you're like, actually, mom, do you know I had this lovely sub in Subway last week? You might like it. You want to go to Subway? Boom. Like it doesn't mean you're not going to the organic like farmer's market, but it's a step in the right direction. So you're providing support to them to make those decisions, as opposed to trying to make it a dictatorship where you're imposing rules. And that also filters into like environmental modification. And what I mean by the environment is essentially the home environment in this case, for the most part. So, for example, like this tends to work the other way around, where generally, like let's say your mom or your dad does all the shopping and brings all the junk food into the house. But in this case, your goal is to create an environment that that leads to better decision making. That includes things like having fruits and vegetables readily available at all times. Okay, so there's not going to be points in the week where you go to the fridge, you're thinking of I don't know, getting an apple if you keep your apples in the fridge. I like to do that. Or you're thinking about getting some veg for your meal and it's not available. Okay, you can make those decisions much easier if those things are always available. Very simple things like having vegetables pre-chopped up in a lunchbox that's in the fridge at all times. You know, in Laura's family home, one of the things that they do is they always have this like bean salad that's prepared in the fridge. Again, really easy to add to meals, and it's a very simple way of, you know, increasing their dietary fiber, getting in the other micronutrients that are going to be present, getting a little bit of extra protein, etc. And the fact that that's going to be there instead of something else that could be on the plate that mightn't necessarily be as healthful. So essentially what you're doing is you're fostering an environment that's likely to lead to better decisions. And that also, like, that works in terms of both addition, in terms of you're adding in things that could be positive, and in terms of subtraction. So you're subtracting things that could potentially be negative. So for example, if you're going to the shop and you're going to buy a drink for yourself, let's say, like I actually do this because I actually like beer myself. But what I will do is, if I won't keep beer stocked in the house, whether it be at home in Killarney or in Cork. What I will do is I'll go and I'll buy a single bottle of beer. Like, why would you do that? Because you're like that means that if there was 6 available, maybe on a Tuesday or Wednesday, I might be like, oh, actually, I wouldn't mind a beer now. But instead, it's like there's only one. That's it. Cold turkey. You know, so you're only making those decisions available. Now, I'm not saying that you should sacrifice your budget because you can buy everything individually when things are cheaper in multi-packs. Like, not at all, but you have to be somewhat smart about this. The same thing goes for things like crisps. If you go to the shop and you're getting yourself a bag of crisps, get yourself a bag of crisps. Don't come home with a 24-pack of crisps that are going to be there for the week and that are going to lead to other people potentially making worse decisions with their diet. So I guess the key thing there is that you're doing things that are not necessarily direct, and they're not directly pushing someone in a certain direction, but they're more likely to lead to positive decisions. And the final little part of that is then trying to develop a culture where you engage in more healthful behaviors. And this kind of comes back to like how you identify yourself, like what your own identity is. Like, if you develop a culture in your family where we're actually a family who go for walks, like that's one of the things that we do, or we put effort into cooking and we all sit down and have meals together. That's a positive culture within the family that might lead to better health decisions, as opposed to it being like, oh, we're a family who gets fish and chips every Friday night. Like, that's fine if that's what you do, but you know, there's those things. Like, there's many families who will have certain fast food nights, or maybe you all normally go out for drinks a certain night. So that's not to say that those things are bad things, but bringing in a culture of more of those positive, healthful behaviors is a nice way of moving everyone in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think it's obviously just an entirely hard process to do overall. And what I'm going to say is almost antagonistic to what you just said, where you're saying like you want to do all these indirect things to essentially move the family unit, or again the individuals, the family, friends, whatever, towards better habits. But what I also think needs to happen is the same with like just coaching individuals in general. Like, you actually need to show them how to eat a certain way, or how to exercise a certain way, you know, like, because I think a lot of people focus a little bit too much on the information around it. You know, they're like, oh, well, you need to do resistance training because it increases bone density, and you know, you are a menopausal woman. It's like they don't care about that. Like, yeah, obviously they do care about that, but what they really want to know is like, okay, well, how do I actually put a plan of action together? You know, like, that's why we made all those like 3-day, 4-day, 5-day, 6-day ebooks and stuff, because, you know, it's like, well, a lot of people are just asking, they don't want coaching, they don't need coaching. They just want to be like, I just want to know that I'm on track with a structured plan. You know, that's all I want, you know? And it's the same with the individuals in your family, where it's like, they just want to know, okay, well, how do I put a plan together so that I can actually engage in exercise? You know, can you just show me a few different exercises that I can do at home? You know, even if it's just like body weight squatting, you know, if it's just like you get some sort of cardio machine, or it's like, okay, well, you can go for walks, you know, like here I'll walk with you, I'll show you a nice little route around our house that's safe, that's fucking not uphill, that, you know, it's easy to do, to integrate into your overall life, you know. Or you show them different habits. It's like, okay, well, you can do this and this will help with all your other stuff. And the same with the diet, where it's like you actually have to show them, be like, okay, well, you see how, like, when you're cooking this meal, you're adding in that fucking half a block of butter there. It's like, well, you can actually make this easy swap, you know, or cut down the amount, and that's how you can save a few calories there. You know, okay, well, you are using, like, I don't know, 25% or 30% fat mince for this. It's like, okay, can we switch out to, you know, a lower fat amount, even if it's like 10% or 15% or whatever it is. It's like, you don't have to be like 5% or 3% or whatever. It's like, you just save calories where you can, and you show them how to make these easy saves. So it's like, you're not actually changing their overall lifestyle hugely. Like, they're still eating, say they're making a fucking, I don't know, lasagna or something. It's like, all you did was change out the mince that they're using for that, you know.
Yep.
But it's like, oh, you've just saved 600 calories there. Wow, too easy, you know. Like, stuff like that, where it's like, you just make these easy swaps. You know, it's not, you are directly showing them what to do, you know, but it is, like you're saying, like that kind of indirect, where it's like, you're not going, oh, this is, you're saving calories doing this, or, you know, this is why you're doing this. It's like, that's not what I'm saying. It's like, you just make these little swaps here and there, and you're like, okay, now if we look at your overall diet across the week, because of all these little changes that we've made, these better habits that we've instilled, you have moved towards a better micronutrient dense diet, and you've moved towards, you know, more calorie appropriate diet, you know. And again, this is something that's really hard for fitness individuals, fit pros, or whatever you want to call them, because they essentially, well, generally are stuck in a paradigm where it's like, oh, well, I only know how to do IFIM, or I only know how to do like bodybuilding style training. And it's like, well, to help this individual, those two things are probably not going to be the things that they need, you know? So it's like, what works for you or what you do as an individual doesn't necessarily translate to what they need to do, you know? Like, if you're talking to your 60-year-old mother, and she's like, oh, well, I just want to, you know, ensure that I'm not fucking weak going into my old age. I don't want to, you know, get broken bones or whatever, you know? They're just like, okay, well, like, this is how we can go about this, you know? It's like, okay, you're going to do some fucking body weight lunges. Oh, you're getting good at those, you know? That's fine, cool. You know, there's 2 milk cartons in the fridge there. Just pick them out while you're doing it, you know? It's like, can we just add a little bit of resistance? And you're thinking it as a bodybuilder, being like, that's nothing, man. I do that with fucking 200 kilos on my back. You know, it's like, this is not comparable. It's like, you're just looking for easy wins and a way to instill good behaviors into that individual. So you need to show them the path, but you don't necessarily need to be like, this is the reason we're doing this, and this is how often you should do this. It's like, just to show them a way that they can implement these habits into their daily life.
Yeah. And like that last point you're kind of alluding to, in terms of like not imposing what you do onto other people, like, is just so incredibly important, especially when it comes to just people who are generally trying to improve their health. As in, like, you want to actually ask yourself, what are likely to be the biggest wins for this person when it comes to improving their health? And like, that's really what matters. But very often what we do, especially if you're not a coach, you're not an experienced coach, you're going to try to take maybe what you've done and impose it onto someone else, and think that that's likely to be what's needed. Like, for example, you could take the fact that, oh, people who are who have higher levels of aerobic fitness tend to live longer. Or you could take the fact that people who are stronger tend to live longer. That's and resistance training is generally going to be a good idea. You could take those facts and say that, all right, I need to get my mom, like, she needs to be running 10K runs like ASAP. And why isn't she squatting with a barbell? Like, instead of like breaking it down and saying, okay, like, my mother is currently very sedentary. She probably gets 2,000 steps a day. I wonder, could we get that to 5,000? That'd be a big win, wouldn't it? You know, that'd be good. Because what you're seeing when you look at something like, if you look at an analysis, say, of people with a certain VO2 max, and you see, like, we posted a paper about this recently in our Facebook group. If you look at like how VO2 max correlates with lifespan or longevity, like, that's interesting. But if you take someone who does have like a VO2 max of 60, what you have to appreciate is that, right, that's likely to be a person who has trained for their whole life. They've probably eaten pretty well. They've probably slept pretty well. Like, there's lots of other variables that are going into determining that person's lifespan, and the genetics that led them to having a positive response to training. And like to take that and assume that that's what your mother needs to do, like that's kind of silly. Instead, what you're thinking is, all right, how can I move the needle forward? Like that's your only goal. Your only goal is to get to better health behaviors than the person has currently. And if you're getting from 2,000 to 5,000 steps, like that's a big win. You know, if you're getting from 1 serving of vegetables per day to 4 servings, like boom, that's a win. Like all those things are little wins that are pushing someone in the right direction. And I guess what you have to accept is that you don't need to be chasing overnight change with someone. Like if you can get someone to improve their dietary fiber a little bit, get a couple of extra servings of veg, take more steps throughout their day, even if they were to lose like 3 to 5 kilos, like all those things can significantly contribute to better health, you know. And I think people are often surprised by that, you know. Even if you lose like 10% of your body weight, which is, it's a lot, but it's not that much. Even 5% of your body weight, you see significant improvements in health. Like it doesn't mean that someone has to get down to having abs. It doesn't mean that someone needs to be able to run 10K, 20K runs, or that they can squat double body weight. Sure, you want to push the needle in that direction, but it's the behaviors and the outcomes of the behaviors that are important. So pushing the needle forward is what ultimately matters. The other thing that's important to realize is that most of your parents are like let's say your parents are closing on 60, maybe they're over 60 already. They're doing pretty well. You know what I mean? Like that's one of the things that comes into like lifespan. Like if you're talking about like how the average lifespan for someone, if someone has already survived to 60, their likelihood of surviving later has already increased by the fact that they got to 60. It's really important to remember. So that person's already, you know, doing pretty well. So how can you then just push that needle forward a little bit so that they're going to be the ones that live towards the upper end of that, as opposed to the lower end of that? And they're the things that I guess people need to think about a bit more, and not just think that, right, my 60-year-old mother needs to be like my 24-year-old self. You know, they need to behave like me. It's nice to think that idealistically, but being realistic is probably a better approach.
Right. So I think that should help answer the question, because essentially there is no answer to this question, because the real answer is refer out. But if you do want to help friends, family, whatever, and they are receptive to getting your help, then yeah, you can help them, right? But first of all, you want to create some sort of skin in the game. So getting them to pay you is a good idea. Or, you know, be like, right, if you don't show up for this session we're going to do together, you owe €50 to charity. Like if you don't like the concept of taking money from your mother or your father or whatever, it's like, well, then give it to charity, you know, like it doesn't matter, even if it's a tenner or whatever, you know, but there has to be some sort of skin in the game, you know. And you can also do a lot by just doing a little, you know, where it's like, okay, let's just move the habits that the family engages in or the individual engages in towards better habits. It doesn't have to be an all-encompassing, all or nothing. You need to be tracking every single calorie that enters your mouth. Like, doesn't need to be that. It can be like, okay, let's make some easy saves with calories. Let's make some easy swaps with introducing more variety, more micronutrient density into the diet. Cool. We've moved the needle forward. Same with the training. It could be a concept of just, okay, let's get your general day-to-day activity up. Like that's what we did for my dad as well. Like we just got him a step counting watch, you know, and it's like, okay, cool. All you have to do is get 6,000 steps per day. And that's what he does. Just get 6,000 steps per day, you know, and that's his fitness goal, you know? So like stuff like that. It's like, okay, can we just make small changes so that you can actually get towards your overall goals? You know, it doesn't have to be mind blowing, earth shattering or anything. It just has to be a small change that moves people in the right direction. You know, again, like if you're 40, 50, 60, you're probably not going like, oh yeah, I need to get 6-pack abs so I can, you know, show them off at the beach. You know, it's like, that's probably not what you care most about. It's probably going to be like health, longevity. And it's like, there's actually so much you can do for that with very little input, you know, with very little change. Like obviously you do have to change, but very little hard change. Like you don't have to change your entire lifestyle to get that. And related to that as well, as we've talked about it before, I think it was two weeks ago, maybe, the sleep aspect as well. Like most most people just sleep terribly. So if you can just move that needle forward and go, okay, start setting, sleep and wake times, like actually consistently get 8 hours of sleep. It's like, okay, wow, now I don't have those terrible food cravings that I was having that was derailing my entire diet. Oh, and sleep is healthful. So this is great, So do you have anything else to round that off, Gary, before we wrap this up?
Only final thing would be to, like, if you're thinking that, why aren't my family members like doing what I'm doing? Why aren't they healthy? Try to avoid that frustration. I think it's important to recognize that, like, a lot of our parents would have, like, they grew up in different times, as in, like, their health behaviors at that time were, like, they were not direct, they were somewhat indirect. And what I mean by that is that, like, when my mom talks about, like, when she grew up, she'd say things like you didn't have a choice for what you got for breakfast. She lived in a family of seven. Was it seven? 7 or 8. And the pot of porridge. I know the pot of porridge was made. You came down in the morning, you had your porridge, or you didn't have breakfast. Like, simple as, like, bye bye, motherfucker. Like, you're not getting toast with jam and biscuit bars and all this stuff. You have your porridge, or you don't have your porridge. You go to school. You might have a ham sandwich and an apple or something, and you come home in the evening. Your dinner's on the table. It's probably going to be meat, spuds, and some sort of veg. If you want to eat it, eat it. If you don't, there's nothing else there. Sorry. Like, at the time, like, the milk was sitting in a basin of cold water. There weren't fridges. Like, you didn't have the opportunity to go into the fridge and have the luxury of having all these options available. So you make that choice. Like, if you're lucky, you might get a plain biscuit, with your tea before you go to bed. Like, that'd be a nice little treat. And in terms of, like, activity, then, like, obviously they were walking to and from school. They weren't using electronic devices. They were outdoors, like, by virtue of the fact that there was nothing else to do most of the time, around playing with others, etc. So all their health behaviors were the result of the culture that they lived in. So they were, like, by default engaging in all these healthy behaviors. Whereas now, the culture has changed so much, and the I hate the word society. The society that we live in.
Words, anyway.
No, because it always makes you sound so woke. It's like, we live in a society. But anyway, it's the change in the society and the environment that has led to all these barriers that they're suddenly faced with. I think that's very different to how we approach health behaviors, where everyone is really, really conscious and reading about it and exposed to all this information, and it's at the forefront of everyone's minds, at least in our circle. And I think at least appreciating that, I think, is a good charitable act.
You're dead right.
That's my closing point.
You're dead right. Yeah, it's pretty weak that your mother only has like 7 in her family now, but whatever. Okay. I thought they were supposed to be true Irish patriots, but obviously not. So do you have anything else to say?
No, this was supposed to be a 30-minute episode. But these episodes, guys, these shorter episodes are never going to be short. They're going to end up being like 90 minutes eventually.
Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up.
Peace out. See you guys on Monday.
Enjoy.